Quick warning, today's video does contain subject matter that may be sensitive to some viewers, and as always, viewer discretion is advised. Also, if you have a story to send my way, just go to astheravendreams.com, and you can figure out what to do from there. And of course, thank you. And this took place several years ago, back when malls were relevant and a popular place to go. I was a single mother at the time, living with my parents until I saved enough to find a place on my own. My ex and I mutually split up because we didn't just jive well as a couple. We jumped into getting a house together way too quick, and neither of us could afford it on our own, so we sold it and I moved in with them. My job was 4 10-hour shifts, so I was at least thankful to have an extra day to spend with my daughter. She was 7 at the time, so I was trying to spend as much time as possible with her, not to mention she was my first child. On my day off during the week, we always had a girls' day, and would go get lunch, go to the park, or do some kind of activity together. The holidays were also a huge deal for my family, filled with events and time spent together. Hell, sometimes they even invited my ex over for dinner since he didn't really do anything with his parents. One of my favorite things to do with my daughter, though, for Christmas was the Craft with Santa night. The kids could see Santa, tell them what they wanted for Christmas, get their picture taken, and then usually had some kind of craft there, like coloring pages or painting an ornament. Things like that, and she loved it. Unfortunately, this one year, I ended up working the day of the event, so I had to rush home to get changed, pick her up, and then head to the mall. They stopped at 8, and I got off at 6, so it was a rush. Thankfully, we got there while it was still going, but they had already started picking up some of the craft stuff, which was upsetting because they were doing these handprint reindeers, and I really liked stuff like that as a keepsake of hers as she got older. There was one kid with Santa as we got in the waiting line, and then Santa and I made eye contact. Being the person I was, I smiled, and he smiled back and winked. Then, it was my daughter's turn. As she started walking up, she asked the helper elf if she could still make a reindeer, and they started saying they were putting it away when Santa interrupted them, reassuring my daughter that she could do one, and insisted that they let her do one, and that he didn't mind staying a little bit later. I thanked them all, but the elf didn't seem too happy with the request. I stood by as my daughter talked the poor guy's ear off. She kept talking, and the guy would look up at me and smile, and then ask my daughter about me, like, "What does mommy want for Christmas? What does daddy do for Christmas? Oh, where is daddy?" Things like that. After they finished, she went over to do her craft, and I tried to help pick up stuff as she finished, or that she wouldn't use. Santa was standing nearby, and we started talking. He complimented me, saying that I looked beautiful for someone with a kid her age. Thanks, I guess. He continued talking about my daughter, talking about what he did for work outside of being a Santa, things like that. Now that I think about it, I think he was really talking himself up at the time. When my daughter finished, we said goodbye and started walking over to the food court to get dinner. As we were walking out, I started hearing someone shouting, "Hey!" Of course, it was like an instinct to see who was shouting, and I turned around to see a man running over towards me and waving. I stopped as the guy caught up to me. I didn't recognize him at first until he started talking, and I realized that it was the Santa. He made a joke about me not recognizing him without the belly suit, and I laughed a bit. He asked me for my number and if we could get together sometime. I was a bit taken aback at first, as I never had this happen to me before, and being put on the spot, I didn't know what else to do but follow through. So I gave it to him. I told him I'll look into it, and we left. That did not turn out to be a good thing to do, though. This was about 3 weeks before Christmas, which was one of the busiest times at my work, so I didn't get a lot of free time, and the time I did have off was spent catching up on sleep and spending it with my daughter. I learned the Santa guy's real name was Drew, and he liked to text me almost every hour. That same night, he texted me saying thank you for the number and good night. I just responded back, "You're welcome," or something like that. It was kind of like first meeting someone and then getting to know them afterwards. He seemed fine at first, but as I mentioned with him messaging me hourly, if I didn't respond quick enough, he would then send messages like, "Hello? Are you still there? I miss you. I'm sorry, I know that I can be too much." Things like that. Again, I didn't know how to respond other than being nice and saying, "No, you're not too much," and things like that, just explaining that I work a lot. Then I told him where I worked to further explain. I work at a custom clothing store where we make things like uniforms in bulk for businesses, schools, and even just suits. We get a lot of business orders towards the end of the year, like they're using up the last of the budget. So we really don't have any downtime. A few days after telling Drew this, my boss came to get me telling me that I had a visitor, and reminded me that guests were not recommended since we had a lot of big machinery in there. I was very much aware of this as I never had visitors and never even really told anyone where I worked, other than my parents and ex in case of emergencies, so I had no idea who it could have been at first. As I started walking to the front, I saw Drew standing there with a bouquet of flowers. I again was polite and thanked him for the flowers, but I told him that I wasn't allowed to have visitors there. I also asked him how he found out where I worked, and he pretty much brushed off the question. He left shortly after, and I got back to work even with everyone looking at me. He was really nice, but I wasn't used to this, so I just took it for what it was and lived with it. I also didn't really tell my parents much about it beyond that I had sort of met a guy. And they were happy for me, but didn't really ask much more than that. And I didn't mention anything of our meeting each other to them. For the next few weeks, though, it just got worse. And as you can tell, I was quite the pushover. I wasn't the hostile type, and I typically just let things be, so when he started asking me for pictures, asking me my every move, where I was, and calling when I didn't respond, I didn't know what else to do but oblige. He just started calling me endearing names, started sending risque pictures and asking for them in return, and I just slowly became more and more of a recluse, afraid to go out and run into him. I ended up running late to drop my daughter off with my ex, and I never did that, and I guess between that and the way I looked, he could tell there was something wrong. He finally coaxed it out of me and started asking about this guy, and I explained it all to him. He said I needed to report it to the police and stop responding to this guy. He also asked for his address, and that's when I realized that I still had no info on where he lived or did, other than that he was a mechanic. I didn't know what shop or where. Hell, it could have been a shop out of his own home. He knew more about me than I knew of him. Like I said, my ex and I didn't work together, but we did still care about each other, and he even told my parents and older brother about it when he came over once, so they all convinced me to start by blocking his number. That only worked for so long, and he then would begin calling and texting me from different numbers, so I had to get a new phone number. This just enraged him, as he showed up at my work again and caused a scene. Thankfully, I told my boss about this when I changed my phone number, so they knew that his presence was not welcomed. Thankfully, my boss was actually kind and understanding about the whole situation, and was glad to call the cops on him when he showed up. The first 2 times, she told him that I wasn't there at the time, claiming I was off or on lunch, but then he started getting more and more aggressive, so she called the cops on him. He was escorted away because we had strict rules about customers and trespassing. I also started having an officer follow me home on the days he showed up, just to be safe. Or my brother or ex would take me to and from work so I wasn't alone. It seemed to finally work as he stopped showing up at my work, and I stopped getting random friend requests from weird accounts on social media. So I was finally getting back to a normal life. My daughter's birthday was in early January as well, and all of her Christmas and birthday money was burning in her pocket, and she wanted to go shopping. The problem was that during her birthday party, I had slipped on the ice and actually fractured my ankle, so I once again had to rely on my parents and brother for help for a bit. My brother's car was being worked on, and I offered to let him use my car if he was willing to go with me and my daughter to the mall for a while, and he agreed. My daughter loved him too, so they always had fun together. We went to the mall and walked around as much as I could with crutches until we started to head out. We parked by the main entrance, and right before we walked out, there was one of those quarter machines that my daughter wanted to get something from. So, as I was digging out a quarter, my brother asked me nervously, "Hey, do you know him?" As I looked up, I saw Drew standing by the entrance intersection, hands balled in a fist and just staring at me angrily. I immediately started freaking out and telling my brother that we needed to go now. He grabbed my daughter to pull her in front of us, and I started grabbing my phone to call the cops when he just started screaming. I turned around and saw him charging toward us. Afraid he was going to hurt me, I shoved my daughter to the side and braced for impact when I heard a grunt and saw my brother fall to the ground. Drew was punching me and calling me a cheating whore, and my daughter was now screaming. Time just seemed to slow down, and I didn't know what to do. Thankfully, there was a mall security guy nearby, and another random guy that had pulled him off my brother and subdued him. My brother, however, is not as forgiving as me, and he pressed charges on him. I was also given the opportunity too, since he'd pushed me out of the way. I never saw him again after that. I was incredibly thankful that my brother was with me that day, because I had no idea what he would have done to just me and my daughter, but I also felt bad as my brother had to get a tooth replaced and had a black eye for a while. He teased me about owing him, but I think he was also just happy to be there that day. So, Overall, if I learned anything, if someone asks you for your number and if even a part of you isn't comfortable with it, say no. You are not obligated to give it to them. And also, tell someone if they start getting controlling. Don't go through what I did. It only lasted about a month or so, but it was one of the worst times of my life. So, Drew, I hope that you never meet me or my family again. This all happened back somewhere around 2017. I had just turned 18 that year and was trying to save up money to get my own place. Not necessarily because I wanted to, but because I was the youngest of 4 boys, and I think my parents were at a point where they just really wanted me out of the house. Not trying to complain about my parents, but they were a bit pushy about me getting money and getting the hell out. I had a job. It just didn't pay very well, and I was still trying to figure out what I was going to do for college, my career, and all of that. Honestly, it's not super important, but it kind of frames what was going on in my life. Because my parents wanted me gone, and they had given me a pretty tight time frame as to when they wanted me out, I was doing almost anything I could to get money. It was around Christmas time, and thankfully I did have a few avenues to get money saved up. Like I said, I had my job and that was covering most of the necessary expenses. And every time anyone asked me what I wanted for Christmas, my response was $50. Mostly joking, of course. That said, I also did have a few things I could sell, but that was supposed to be my last resort. The week before Christmas, I kind of hit that last resort. Like I mentioned, my parents wanted me out pretty quickly, and they were pushing for me to find a place the first week of January. I was getting there, but I needed a little bit more, so I moved on to selling my electronics, which is something an 18-year-old never wants to do. I sold my old laptop for about $100. I sold my brother's old Nintendo consoles for some money, and I ended up at a point where I was listing my PS4 Pro, which was my prized possession. Thankfully, they were harder to find in my area, so I was able to list it on Craigslist for $500 with the extra controllers and a few games. And I was willing to be talked down to $400 if it really came down to it. I only needed about $200 more at this point, but it's obviously better to have more than you need in these situations. Within a couple hours of me listing it, I got several messages from people that were obviously scammers and spammers. But there were also a few people messaging me asking if they could get it for like $100 because they had a sick kid that really needed it for Christmas, as it could be their last one. Look, I'm all about helping sick kids, but using that as a reason to talk a seller down to 20% of their PS4 asking price, that's just low. I got another message from a guy that asked if I was willing to come down a little bit on the price. I assumed it was going to be another sob story about a sick kid, and he was going to try to lowball me hard. It seemed like that's how it was going to go when he mentioned that it was something he wanted, so he could play some games with his 8-year-old daughter and her mother. But then he came back with a modest request, $50 off. He would be willing to give me $450 in cash that day if I was willing to meet up with him in public. Now, I know it's not smart to just take the first good-sounding offer, but within 4 hours, I had gotten over a dozen sob stories and twice as many bots. I was seriously done with this already. I responded and told him that it was his, and then asked him where he wanted to meet up. He responds thanking me and telling me that they would be able to meet in the parking lot of a hotel that was around 5 or so miles away from where I lived. I was a bit confused on why he would want to meet in a hotel parking lot, but at the same time I wasn't about to really question the choice. It was still in public. Hotels do have cameras, plus there would likely be people around. I packed up the system with all the extras nicely in a box, tossed it in my passenger seat, told my mother where I was going, and headed out. I got out to the hotel in question and parked. I then messaged the guy saying that I was there and to let me know when he gets there. He responds saying that they're actually staying there for the night and that he would be right down. He then asked me if I could bring it into the lobby. At that point, meeting here did make a lot more sense, and while I was a bit iffy walking across the parking lot into the lobby with an expensive console, I had parked pretty close to the front, so I risked it. I got into the lobby with the box, and the front desk clerk asked if they could help me. I told them I was just meeting someone that was staying there, and then sat down and waited for a few minutes. Then, I saw a guy exit the elevator that looked like he was looking for someone, and I correctly assumed it was the buyer. We did the customary greetings and moved forward to the transaction. He opened the box, looked over the items, and remarked that they all looked new. I told him that I had bought it a while back, and that I was the only one that ever played it, and that I was really paranoid about keeping the stuff clean. I mentioned that I had even opened the case and blew out the dust before I listed it, so it was in near perfect condition. I showed him the discs for the games that I had listed, and then also mentioned that I was throwing in my copies of Crash and Kingdom Hearts for his little one, because I knew that she would probably like them. He thanked me and said that he really appreciated it. Honestly, this transaction was going super smooth for our whole conversation. I thought it was going to just be a quick sale. He pulls out his wallet and then pulls the cash out. I see 4 $100 bills. He then mentions to me that he had the full $450, but they had to spend $50 on pizza for lunch, and that because of that, he was a little bit short. Then, he says something I really did not expect. And this is going to be verbatim, because I don't want to paraphrase and have this come across as less creepy than it really was. He said, and again verbatim, "I'm sorry that I'm $50 short, but my girlfriend and my daughter are up in the room, and I'd be willing to let you spend some time with them if you would just give me a discount." I want to further emphasize that this guy mentioned his 8-year-old daughter in this context. It wasn't just, "Hey, do you want to go spend time with my adult girlfriend?" It was girlfriend and my daughter. This guy was willing to sell his girlfriend and their child for $50 for personal time. I really don't know what else to say about all of this, honestly. The whole thing left me at a loss for words. Pimping out your girlfriend for $50 off of a PS4 was gross, sure, but then including your young daughter in that context, that was a whole new level of disturbing. After a few seconds of just kind of staring at him, and I guess him waiting for an answer, I just said, "400's fine," and put my hand out. He handed me the cash and said thank you. I just said yeah and turned to leave and put that whole event behind me. Honestly, I didn't know what to do after this. I don't know if he was being serious or if he had just said that to get a discount because who in their right mind would accept that offer? Or maybe it was a weird sting and if I had said yes, I would have been jumped or arrested. Out of all the possibilities, the worst one, and the one that seriously haunts me, is the one where this was an honest offer. It scares the hell out of me to think that this guy was being serious. And that's the end of it. I told my parents, they didn't really seem to care. I didn't report it to the cops because I didn't know what to tell them. I got the money together and I moved out, and I've been on my own ever since. I really do hope that that guy wasn't serious, but if he was, I am so very sorry that I never did anything more, and that, as an ignorant and confused kid myself, I didn't know what to do in this situation. I was always ecstatic when it came time for Christmas as a kid. I was always that kid who went all out with it, but that was also partially my mom's fault. She loved buying us matching outfits. My older brother and dad didn't care for it, but we enjoyed it. So, needless to say, I was never short on festive outfits. I loved to decorate our living room and the tree. I remember I was very picky at like 6 or 7 years old about how the ornaments and garland were strewn out on the tree. I always made it to where we had an extra strand so I could use it as decorations in my room or my backpack or something. Another part of this exciting time for me was Santa. I was a firm believer, and you can bet that I did everything I was supposed to do to make sure that I was on that nice list. From doing chores, homework was done as soon as I got home from school. I behaved as much as possible, as long as my brother wasn't pestering me, things like that. I made a very organized wish list, and I laid out the best cookies and carrots for him and the reindeer. However, the one thing I was never able to do was catch him in the act. I wanted to see him leaving the presents and see how he got in, since we didn't have a fireplace anymore. Every year, I tried staying up all night. Being a kid, though, I didn't have many options. I tried counting, reading. I tried to watch TV on a very low volume so I didn't wake up my parents, but I would always end up crashing. Of course, one of those years that I would end up falling asleep early would be when I finally got to see him. This Christmas Eve was like the others. I tried to stay up as late as possible with my parents while we watched a movie, and I thought I would eat as much sweets as my parents would let me, in hopes that I might get a sugar high and keep myself awake. They didn't fall for it though, and they rushed me off to bed around 10 p.m., so now I had to try and stay up on my own in my room. This, of course, didn't work, and I ended up crashing from the sugar maybe an hour or two in. However, I woke up around 2 in the morning to use the restroom, and as I was heading back to my room, I could hear shuffling sounds coming from the living room. How our house was set up was the front entrance led into the back living room, where we usually had the tree and presents set up. To the left was a small hallway with stairs leading to the second floor, where my parents' room was, but at the end of the hallway was our more used front living room. And the other side of the front room had my room, my brother Isaiah's room, and the bathroom. I looked around the hall where the bathroom was and tried to look down the hallway where the back room was. That's when it finally clicked in my little head that I was finally going to meet Santa Claus in my own home. I slowly tiptoed towards the hall to get a close-up of the man in red. I got to the end and saw a big, dirty red bag sitting next to the tree, and the man bending over moving around presents. I just remember standing there in awe, not knowing what to do next, so I watched him for a moment when I noticed that he put the present he was holding into the bag. My little kid mind immediately thought maybe he got the houses mixed up and thought this was a good time for me to help. I slowly whispered, "This is the last name household." And I've never seen someone turn around so fast in my life. It actually scared me too. He just stood there staring at me for several seconds with the widest eyes. So I apologized for scaring him and told him I didn't want him to get any presents mixed up, so I was letting him know our names. And then I told him my name was Jasmine and my brother's name was Isaiah. He continued to stand there for a few more seconds until I asked him if he'd had the cookies yet, to which he seemed to relax a bit more and softly said no. I smiled and asked if he wanted to try them now. He smiled back and said yes. So I swiftly grabbed the tray from the kitchen table, which was back behind the living room on the other side. When I came back to the room, he was still standing there and looking around, so I handed out the tray to him. He took a cookie and the glass of milk and began eating it. I was excited because I had asked to make homemade cookies that year, and I was telling him how I made them. That's when he was smiling and kneeled down to look me in the face and said, "I can tell you've been a good girl this year." I remember being so excited about this because if Santa is telling you this directly, it has to be true. And why would I not get what I wanted from my list then? I hugged him and remembered talking to him for a while longer about all kinds of things. I even mentioned my brother not believing in him and that it was going to be funny telling him this. That's when he became more serious and said that I couldn't tell my brother about him being here, or anyone for that matter. Curious, I asked him why, as I thought it would make more sense for people to believe in him. His response was something to the effect of that it's the small mysteries and random gifts that appear that make him more believable. He just seemed so wise to my child self. Shortly after, he mentioned that he needed to get going so he could finish the work, but then I asked him if I got this specific doll that I wanted. He said yes, but that next year, I should ask for something bigger, like a game console because I've been so good. I told him that I would, but that my brother asked for one this year, so I wanted to make sure that was okay. He again looked back over at our tree and smiled and said I could, but to keep the door unlocked on Christmas night so that it's easier for him to get in. And he also asked to keep it unlocked tonight as well, in case he needed to come back to drop off extras, and then winked at me. I excitedly agreed to do so, and as he approached the door, I asked him to wait there, and I ran to grab the carrots for the reindeers. I wanted to ask if I could feed them to the reindeers myself, when I saw my brother groggily standing by our rooms and staring at me. When I saw him, I cut my question off in the middle and started staring at him. And that's when he started walking toward us and asked, "Jasmine, who is that?" I started looking over at Santa, and he quickly shoved me to the ground and started struggling to unlock the door. My brother started running toward us and shouting for my parents. He then yelled at me to get them, but I just froze in fear. My brother was now trying to fight Santa and stopping him from leaving. Thankfully, my parents heard the commotion and came running out of their room. That's when Santa punched my brother, though, and managed to run out the door. My dad took off out the door after him, and my mom was helping my brother up and was asking if we were okay and what had happened. If you haven't guessed yet, my dreams of meeting Santa were crushed when I found out that it was a cleverly disguised burglar trying to steal all of our new presents. My dad didn't catch him, but at least saw which direction he went, and the cops ended up catching him later that night. His bag of presents had a few of ours, as well as some of the neighbors. If I hadn't caught him in the act, he may have gotten away with it, or at least got a lot more before he was caught. For my age, I was heartbroken, and it was hard for me to get past that, but I'm also a bit thankful because I was able to distract him until my brother woke up, which stopped other families from having an unexpected surprise as well. So, just lock your doors and your windows, guys, no matter how safe you think you are in your neighborhood. So this was a collection of stories, scary, true stories that involve Christmas. And 2 of them that involve Santa Claus, ironically. Third one didn't have Santa Claus, but was genuinely freaky in its own right. God, I don't know what I would do in that situation. If I was selling a PS4 and the guy said that kind of thing, I'd freak out too. Especially being 18, I don't think there's any way they could have known what to do in that situation. The other 2 with the Santa Claus is the stalking one, and then the burglar who dresses as Santa to burgle houses. Come on now. But at the same time, I guess if you're going to do that on Christmas, you may as well go all out, right? Anyways, creepy Christmas stories. Hopefully you all enjoyed the video. If you did, please do hit that like button. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing if you liked what you heard. If you're not new, don't unsubscribe, because that will make it to where you don't see my stuff. And is that what you want? Is that what you want? You don't want to see my stuff? Why would you want that? That would break my heart. And also, leave me a comment, letting me know your plans for the holiday, if you celebrate the holiday. If you don't, just let me know what your plans are for the weekend. Just let's chat. Let's talk about things. Yeah. All that said, friends, I hope you're having a beautiful day, beautiful week. This is almost the end of my week-long content thing going on here, and I'm trying to figure out what to do for next week. So, all that said, friends, I hope you have a beautiful day, and hope I'll see you next time. But until then, sleep well.